Hey y'all, how are you doing? I just went through a 36-hour blackout. As some of you are well aware, I'm a Los Angeles native who recently moved to Cleveland, Ohio. I kind of forgot that blackout still exists until I came to Cleveland, because I honestly can't really recall the last blackout that I experienced in Los Angeles. I think the last one that I could recall happened in grade school. So it's been quite some time, somewhat over 20 years since I last experienced a blackout. And then I came to Cleveland, and this actually wasn't the first blackout that I faced. The first one happened last autumn, and it went for 7 hours between 8 o'clock p.m. to 3 o'clock a.m. It happened in fall, in autumn. So it was inconvenient because I didn't have any electricity at nighttime when I needed it the most, but it wasn't as life-threatening as this most recent blackout, which happened right before New Year's Eve in the middle of winter in Cleveland. If this happened in Los Angeles, it would have been more of an inconvenience because at the time that the blackout occurred, I shared my plight with my mother, and she was in the process of actually going out for a swim. And she was telling me that it was 75 degrees in Los Angeles during that same time frame. Whereas here it was about 30 degrees Fahrenheit. So Cleveland geographically is located in the snow belt, which means that it snows a lot and it's very cold in the winter, whereas Los Angeles is geographically located in the Sun Belt, which is probably why I don't see any homeless people in Cleveland, Ohio, because I think they probably all take the Greyhound to Southern California as soon as they're able to save up for a bus ride. You really can't survive outdoors when the temperatures are in the 30s in the winter. It could also drop to sub-zero degrees. So that's something that you need to be aware of if you live in the Midwest. It could be life-threatening. In fact, I heard about a story where this woman in Pittsburgh is located in Pennsylvania, which is the neighboring state from Cleveland, Ohio. And this is like a 3-hour drive from Cleveland. So this woman in Pittsburgh was donating some clothes in one of those boxes that are just out in the public where you could just drop it off at any time. I guess she was donating it late at night. So she opened the lid, and somehow she was found the next day with her hand trapped on the lid and unfortunately frozen to death. So Los Angeles weather coming from LA climate, it's not conducive to hypothermia. Like Cleveland and Los Angeles, you need to beware of heat strokes more than hypothermia because it just never gets that cold in LA. But yeah, it all started at 8 in the morning. As soon as I found out that the power had gone out, I called the power company to immediately report the outage. And the operator on the other line, she was telling me that the matter was being looked into and that power will be restored by 4 o'clock p.m. in the afternoon. And when I heard this, Obviously, I thought that this was awfully inconvenient to go from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. without any power. But I still thought that perhaps I could visit the library and keep myself warm that way and make do, since it was still within business hours. However, the operator on the other line finished her sentence and said that she meant 4 o'clock p.m. the next day. Being without power in the winter, I just feel like it should be resolved as soon as possible, not in 36 hours. And when I mentioned it to other people, they all seem to take it very matter-of-factly here. People in Cleveland seem like good, humble people. They're also sort of complacent and passive and obedient. So they're not really the types to complain. You could take that as a good thing, a virtuous thing, or you could take that as a not so good thing. Because when there is a problem, it takes forever to get fixed here in general because nobody complains. Whereas if this same thing happened in Los Angeles, I think a riot would erupt. But anyway, I was telling the operator on the other line that they should always expect the unexpected and hire enough people, have enough people contracted to their network and trained, because this is Cleveland after all. You can't say that this was unexpected, considering that the weather here, the climate here, is kind of notorious for being unpredictable. So anyway, what ended up happening, as I learned, was that the wind knocked down a tree, and then the tree, like a domino, fell on a utility pole, and I guess it just took out the power line. So I was in communication with my neighbor, and he actually has a girlfriend who lives across the street from him, and she still has power. So I learned that this wasn't a mass blackout. This power outage was limited to me and my neighbors on my block. So my next door neighbor was staying over at his girlfriend's house the whole time, and he was calling me regularly for routine updates because he couldn't be bothered with calling the power company himself, even though I kept encouraging him to call the power company because I felt that if more people vocalized their complaints, then maybe the power company would feel a little bit more pressure and urgency to speed us up the queue and restore power, service us sooner rather than later. But my next door neighbor didn't have the same level of incentive and desperation as I did, because he was warm and cozy at his girlfriend's house across the street from me. So he kept calling me for more updates throughout the day because I kept calling the power company, and the operator on the other line, she was trying to assure me and comfort me by telling me that the 4 o'clock p.m. estimation was an overcalculation on their part, and she was saying that probably the power will be restored at any moment. But I knew that this was just lip service because I was looking out the window the whole time and I didn't see the power company people working on the power lines. So I knew that the power wasn't going to magically get restored out of the blue. It wasn't something that they could repair from their end in their headquarters. Someone actually had to come out and rectify the problem in person. So I just kept looking out the window and hoping that she was right, even though I knew that I shouldn't be holding my breath. So the other thing to keep in mind is that the daytime is a lot shorter in the winter. So daytime occurs between 8 a.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. because sunrise happens around 7:45, sunset happens around 4:30 p.m. So you have a very short window of natural light. And then after that, you're left alone in complete darkness. So evening approached by 5 o'clock p.m. and I was totally unprepared. I didn't have any candles. The only source of flashlight I had was from my phone. And I had no means of generating any heat in the house because everything is reliant on electricity. So the microwave and toaster obviously aren't going to be functioning. Even the gas range is electric now. So I couldn't boil any water. I couldn't heat any food. And last and most importantly, I didn't have the heater either because the furnace requires electrical power to kick on the engine. It was a long night. It was depressing because I was looking out the window the whole time, eating a Pop-Tart, hoping for the power company people to show up. And I noticed that the people across the street, their rooms had lights, so they still had power. I could tell even from the Christmas lights that were decorating their front lawns. And then I'd go over to the other side of the room and look out and notice that the people across the street from me also had electricity. It was just me and my neighbors on my block who didn't have power. And so the way that I had to adapt was to just lay on my bed and bundle up with my blankets. And apparently this isn't as optimal as a sleeping blanket, a sleeping bag. But unfortunately, I don't have a sleeping bag because the purpose of a sleeping bag is to trap body heat. Blankets aren't as efficient as a sleeping bag, but it's better than nothing if you don't have an option. And I didn't have an option, so this was the only thing that I could do. And from time to time, I would fall asleep, but I'd wake up half an hour later to cold feet. It almost felt like I was in a TV show called I Shouldn't Be Alive. This is a show on the Discovery Channel, and it's about real people documenting their trials and tribulations of somehow getting lost in the wilderness and then battling the elements and trying to figure out a way to survive while fending off hypothermia. So it kind of felt like that. And it might sound dramatic and like a first world problem that I'm complaining about this. I'm making such a hyperbolic comparison, but at least in a third world country, you have a shelter that's engineered to handle a flame in your teepee or mud hut. Whereas In Cleveland, I can't just start a fire in the middle of my house without burning it down. I also considered finding a room, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to plunk down $129 for the nearest one-star motel. I read the reviews, and everyone was complaining that there was an infestation of bed bugs and that it was the most disgusting motel that they'd ever been to. So I was determined to just weather the night in my mattress. So I was just lying on my mattress like a mummy. I did this until 8 in the morning, and I got up, I called the power company, and I asked the operator on the other line what it would take for them to come out sooner. And she said that they would only come out sooner if it was an emergency. I hung up the phone and I left my neighbor a lengthy text message imploring him to please call the power company as well to file his grievance and express his frustration. And I didn't hear back from him until 4 in the afternoon, asking me for an update. So 4 o'clock came and went, still no power. But around 4:30 p.m., I noticed some people from the power company. They came in 3 big trucks. So they had finally been dispatched. They had arrived. So I was just wondering if they were going to get it restored or if they were going to need some further investigation. I was very hopeful, and by around 8 o'clock p.m., the power actually came back on, alas. And I was relieved, to say the least. It was the longest 36 hours of my life. I don't know, I still feel like the power could go out at any moment, and this definitely didn't do any favors for my anxiety. Anyway, let me know if this is normal across the world, if power outages is just a fact of life, unless you live in Los Angeles. Maybe I grew up living some charmed childhood in Los Angeles, because not only did we have a gas range that was independent of electrical power, but we also had a heater that was completely operational just if you had an open gas line. So you didn't need electricity to turn on the heater, even though you never needed the heater. So even if you had a blackout in Los Angeles, you could turn the heater on. You could switch it on, but then ironically, you would never need the heater. You would need the AC. So I just find it incredibly short-sighted for them to have relied and made everything dependent on electricity where I am. I don't know how the people couldn't foresee this. I just feel like the heater here, the gas range here, it should depend solely on gas. It shouldn't need electricity. The setup here should be a little bit more foolproof to the fact that the city is prone to power outages. Yeah, let me know, what is the worst blackout that you've ever experienced? Was it 36 hours like me? Was it longer? A little shorter? And how did you deal with it? Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.